Morning, everybody. Michelle is here. Michelle is here on this Saturday, July 4th, 2026. I'm outdoors in my favorite places, just enjoying the moment. It is a bit warm, but that comes with the territory when you're out in nature due to the issues with our climate. So we're going to have a lot more uncomfortable days than comfortable days from now on. People are going to be complaining about the heat. And then once the fall gets here, people are going to be complaining about the winters or the rainy seasons. And I think those are going to be, those are going to prove, they're going to be just as destructive, let's put it that way, than the heat wave that we're experiencing all over the country. And of course, it gets magnified on with some of the major news outlets who do not tell the whole story. They really don't. They don't tell the whole story about what's really going on and why it's happening. But I'm going to do the best I can to share. I want to talk about the extinction of the mediocre man. Okay, and that's going to prove itself through the course of time. I know a lot of people, well, not a lot of people, but I know a lot of scientists are attempting to investigate what happened to the Neanderthals. Why did they go extinct? This was a thriving species that were thriving just like any other species. It wasn't anything like what happened to the dinosaurs. The dinosaurs had a contributing factor as to why the majority of the dinosaurs went extinct. But why did the Neanderthals go extinct? And the pecan man? Why did those species of humans, however they are described, why did they go extinct? So I'm going to talk to you about why the same and similar patterns and behaviors are happening now to the so-called, what I describe as the mediocre man. Okay, the mediocre man is sending themselves towards an extinction. Okay, there's a lot of factors that our scientists are attempting to uncover, and they're not doing a good job of it, because they're, instead of uncovering the truth, they're attempting to justify certain things. Okay, that is what Darwin did. Instead of he probably knew the truth, but he wanted to keep his narrative going about how we descended, and everybody wants to keep saying that, Africans descended from apes, which visually and scientifically prove that's not true at all. But let them continue the narrative, let them continue that narrative, because in the distant future, our children and descendants, whoever's left, are going to wonder what in the world was happening to us during these crucial moments. Instead of devolve less than primates, actually. The devolvement is unprecedented because of the short amount of time that it took to happen. Okay, the Neanderthals supposedly went extinct. They're saying 40,000 years ago. If you look it up in the dictionaries. I'm trying to hold my phone up. I don't have my stand. So, why did the Neanderthals go extinct? Okay, so now look at, again, bring this modern style, okay, and pay attention to what's happening to our humanity. And I'm going to make this very clear, okay? There's a certain level of mediocre men that are being magnified all over the social media platform. But we need to keep in mind, this because of our inbreeding and mixing of races. This mediocre man is inclusive with all races of people, whether you're African, Asian, and consider yourself white, Native American, indigenous, all of that. We have created a species of mediocre man. Okay, whereas it's all inclusive. Okay, again, what's being magnified on the social media platform includes a certain level or a certain amount of mediocre men, which is true. I mean, um, I mean, they're out there. They are usually the ones that are so-called leaders, so-called intellectual minds, the so-called elite. Now imagine in the distant future when you discover the actual genuine history of this planet, and you realize so-called elites went extinct. That probably would be the last thing on your mind. You would not consider such a feat happening, or an event happening. Well, it's on its way. Okay, now let me explain to you what's behind all of it again. Okay, the Neanderthals supposedly went extinct because of uh, climate destruction, not climate change, climate destruction. Okay, that's more evident than ever. They said competitive. What's that term? The competitiveness. They could not compete. Okay, that's definitely happening. Inbreeding, and that's a major source of why other so-called races of people are also included in this described mediocre man. And not to mention, we're massively, massively, massively overpopulated. So a lot of people are going to be involved in this collateral damage. Okay, so for example, if a planet is supposed to only house 1 billion people, the whole planet, but yet the planet has 10 billion people or more, do the math. What do you think is going to happen? Especially if the planet itself cannot sustain all of that, all of these humans, not to mention their toys and equipment. Okay, and I've said this many, many times. Mother Nature, planet Earth, will make things right. Okay, in the past, a lot of the flora and fauna was just and animals were just completely wiped out and went extinct because of the massive irresponsibility of and population of the humans. Human beings are what's causing this massive climate destruction and the extinction of the animals. So now it's going to be reversed. Okay, whereas Mother Nature is going to have the last word. And keep in mind, Mother Nature does not need human beings to thrive and regenerate itself. So we've been told, based on my teachers, that what's going to happen sooner than later, maybe not during my lifetime, maybe not during my next level of descendants, but eventually this planet is going to be wiped out. Okay, and what I mean by wiped out of humans, whereas that will give planet Earth the opportunity to regenerate. And it's going to be with a aberrant amount of people. So what does that mean with the mediocre man? So the research on the Neanderthals was that they became vulnerable to diseases. They could not compete. They left themselves, they were inbreeding, and they were mediocre. A once thriving community went mediocre. Now, when I explain mediocre, let me give you, picture this. What's a mediocre man? Well, if the scientists are being honest with us, they will tell you that maybe 80% of the attempts to procreate are done via IVF. Is that the term? In vitro fertilization? In other words, it's not happening naturally. Okay? The process of procreation is not happening naturally. There has to be someone always interfering to create these humans, and it's so sad because everybody is looking at the fact that they believe that they're supposed to procreate, that they have every right to have their own individual child, but they are using a third party to create this, and this is going to cause massive problems. It's already happening. Nobody's admitting that a lot of these IVFs, I think that's what it's called, are not related at all to the woman that's carrying. Let's see if it'll tell me what this stands for. So bear with me here, because I am outdoors. It's a little warm out here, and sometimes these electronics don't want to work. Hint, hint. Yeah, it's not going to work for me. But do your research and find out why is there so much interference with procreation, why it's not happening naturally. Well, that ought to be a red flag, because that tells you there's something going on with the sperm of the biological man. Okay? And what keeps life going? If you're talking about humanity, it's the healthy sperm of a biological man. All right? The biological man is the component to connect with the biological woman to procreate. But we started interfering. If you go back, I think it was in the 70s or 80s when we started interfering with that process, because the biological man was unable to naturally procreate with a biological woman. So guess what happened? The scientists got desperate and they started interfering, and thus here we are. There are probably more cases of this that's not being disclosed, whereas a biological woman will be inserted with, they believe, genetics and parts of themselves, and then the child comes out from another race, from another source of DNA. And a lot of people could try to say, oh, that was a mistake. No, that wasn't a mistake. That's the consequences that we're running into, and thus is going to create mass extinction of the mediocre man, because he is infertile and he's unable to procreate naturally, and his sperm is not going to be able to uphold the necessary factors to procreate. Does that make any sense? And so, and the same thing applies to the woman too, the biological woman. She's not going to be able to carry, because she's going to continually miscarriage, stillborn. Understand what I'm saying here? We are diluting our fertile abilities to procreate, and that is not by mistake. That's consequences. That is called consequences. So I'm not going to say any more about this today. I'm going to let this be the beginning of what's going to happen, and how the extinction of the mediocre man, there was evidence of that back in the 80s, 70s, when we started interfering with the IVF and the other interference of the so-called quote-unquote scientists, interfering with the process of procreation instead of allowing it to happen naturally. Of course, that's consequences in itself. Okay, so I'm gonna go ahead and stop this right now, because you see me sweating, because I'm sitting in my vehicle and I'm getting ready to do some things. But I want to go ahead and share that and start this conversation. And this conversation of the extinction of the mediocre man will be just as much of a concern as it was for the Neanderthals and the pecan man. Okay? Peace and love. And trust me, I will be back.